I'm getting the screen share situated. I'm not a Zoom professional, so please bear with me. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see my screen, so I think we're okay. So today we're going to be talking about kind of trauma-informed education and kind of the idea of guiding students safely in and safely out of Holocaust education. So how can we do this without re-traumatizing or traumatizing students in a way that's safe for them? So before we do that, I do want to shamelessly plug the Holocaust Center and things that we can do for you, for your school. For your class, whichever it is, we can help you with planning. So if you're approaching Holocaust education and you need a little bit of assistance, you're not sure what might be the best way to approach something, we can help with that. We have pop-up exhibits that we bring to schools. We usually set them up in the media center, and we're able to guide your students through a museum-like experience at the school. So those have been pretty popular, especially last year with the cuts in budgets for buses. So it's been something that teachers have really been taking advantage of. We also have speakers available. So we have volunteer second generation speakers that we work with. So their parents were Holocaust survivors. We bring them to schools. They love speaking to students. They love answering questions that students have. Of course, we offer field trips, so you can come to the museum at no charge for schools. We have tons of resources available. I'm going to go over some of those resources today. We have our Upstanders program, which is really for 6th to 8th grade, where we use the lessons of the Holocaust to encourage students to be upstanders in their community instead of a bystander. And we have the White Rose Essay Contest, and of course, Teachers Institute, which I think a couple of you guys have been to. But essentially, it's, how can we incorporate Holocaust education into our classrooms in a way that's meaningful and responsible? So let's get the ball rolling. Let me move myself out of the way. Sorry, there's a... How do I move me? Okay, there we go. Sorry, there's like a box with my face in it. I can't move it out of the way. All right, so there is a state statute for required instruction for Holocaust education. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but essentially Florida does want students to learn about the Holocaust. And when I'm talking to teachers, I do think sometimes they are a little nervous about incorporating Holocaust education into their curriculum. That is something we can help with, but it is a requirement from the state. So this is something that the state wants them to learn about. So it is their required instruction, part of the required instruction. There are a few strands of standards that kind of stood out to me that I selected that I think kind of help encompass things. Holocaust education standards start in 5th grade and they go all the way to 12th grade. So they get kind of basic at the beginning. So in 5th grade, we're just defining the Holocaust as the planned and systematic state-sponsored persecution of European Jews by Nazi Germany. And then it kind of expands to the impact in the aftermath of the Holocaust by 12th grade. So, and you can kind of see like in 12th, the 912 standards, there's HE 1, 2, and 3. Those are just the base standards. They do actually branch out, and there are more specific standards. So something that we're really good at is helping crosswalk standards. So if you feel like you want to do it, maybe you want to work together with ELA, because we're all social studies people, you can really help kind of crosswalk things and help your partners. Like everyone wants cross-curricular right now, so it's really helpful. It helps the kids. So let's get into the nitty gritty. There are a few guidelines for teaching the Holocaust that we'd highly recommend. The first is defining the term. So what in your classroom is the Holocaust going to mean? So there are a million terms out there. USHMM has a great definition. Yad Vashem has a great definition. But what is the definition of the Holocaust you're going to use in your classroom? Is it the systematic annihilation of Jews? Is it including the other victims of Nazi persecution, whichever it is? Figure out what that term is going to be for your classroom the entire time you're discussing the Holocaust. Other things I would suggest would be that the Holocaust was not inevitable. So I would avoid mentioning things like oh, Hitler was consolidating power, so something was bound to happen. That makes it seem like there was nothing anyone could do. So we want to avoid that. Avoid simple answers to complex questions. Kids have lots of questions all the time, and especially when it comes to the Holocaust, their answers are not always, the answers to their questions are not always so simple. So you don't have to have a simple answer. It's okay to say like that's a complex question, anything like that. Strive for precision of language, meaning use the same terms for the same things consistently. Are you talking about a death camp? Are you talking about a labor camp? Or are you talking about a concentration camp? They are three different things, and make sure that you're referencing them correctly each time, because it can get a little confusing, but also the meanings change when you use different words. We want to avoid comparisons of pain, avoid romanticizing history, which I think personally gets a little difficult, especially when we're talking about rescuers, because we want to like focus on all of the great things they did, but we don't want to, make it look like that was the only thing happening at the same time. And an easy way to do this is by contextualizing the history, right? So we can put the history in context, what was happening during the time period, what was happening before, and then what was happening after. I think sometimes we forget the after part, but that's also important. Translating statistics into people. So really kind of giving that personification. This wasn't just, 1 of 6 million, it was someone's grandma, right? And then tell their story. And teaching through testimony really helps translate the statistics into people. And then, of course, make responsible choices. I'm going to talk about some of those responsible choices here in a moment, but really just use common sense when you're teaching the Holocaust, which I think sometimes it gets a little tricky. So the one thing I want to focus on today is the idea of safely in and safely out. So this is a core principle used in Holocaust education to ensure students can engage with traumatic historical content without becoming overwhelmed or traumatized. So focusing on emotional and psychological safety by carefully structuring the beginning and end of each lesson. And most teachers, I would find, are structuring the beginning and end of each lesson with some kind of bell ringer or an exit ticket. So really, these are just ways that you can incorporate these into your lesson in a way that's going to structure it to help the students essentially avoid kind of that traumatic moments. So why do we do this? What's the rationale, right? So it's trauma-informed teaching, and we know trauma is any situation that exceeds a student's ability to cope. When students are in a traumatic state, learning shuts down, right? So we see this all the time with testing, I think, where, like we taught them all year and then they had a fight with their mom, whatever it is, and then now they're, in a changed state, they're not going to be able to perform well. We can take kind of that mindset and transition it to just everyday classroom, right? If we know students are hungry, they're probably not going to do very well. But sometimes students can try to put themselves in someone else's shoes when we are talking about history to try to relate to them. And we want to avoid that. So we really want to avoid students kind of reminding themselves or putting themselves or empathizing in a way that they would put themselves in someone else's shoes, especially if they do have trauma that they're coming in with. And sometimes we don't know what that trauma is. Our schools try really hard, but sometimes situations are evolving and, a kid will come up to you and be like, I slept in my car last night, I'm so tired. And you don't know until they tell you. So just be mindful of that. The educator's role, right? And I was thinking about this the other day, where I think traditionally educators are the first memory when we're learning about the Holocaust. But nowadays, kids have access to so much misinformation that you're almost the first line of defense against that misinformation. So you are creating the safe environment where students can handle heavy emotions, but also ask you questions. Because let's say, tomorrow we're talking about the Holocaust, everyone, they go home and they, look up TikToks or watch a bunch of YouTube videos, and now they think they've learned something about the Holocaust they can walk in with, and they might actually be less informed than they think. So combating that misinformation is also a really big part of your role, which is kind of changing in today's society, right? And also, we want to start by providing a historically accurate and precise definition of the Holocaust, right? We want to give the kids a sound footing before exploring the complexities. The Holocaust is not a very straightforward topic, so we want to really make sure that they are in a good spot to continue on with that. So I have a few suggestions for how you can approach your safely in, safely out. And then we'll practice one if that's okay with everyone. So for safely in, I would highly suggest establishing kind of like a social contract with your classroom. So set explicit expectations for respectful language, active listening, and support. So we want to reestablish these boundaries every single time. So that way, if a conversation does get off track, you can easily say, well, remember we talked about at the beginning of class, we're going to keep things this way. Also, humanizing through context. Focus on pre-war Jewish life, European culture, families, what they were doing before. These people had entire lives beforehand. So that way students don't think about these people as just victims. We don't want people to just perceive them through the worst years of their suffering. We want them to be perceived as people. You could use primary sources, authentic quotes, survivor testimonies. I love survivor testimonies to kind of move your way through the history. And then you can also take a wide lens approach, which is kind of the activity that we'll practice, where you can address the subject more broadly and then bring things in a little bit at a time. And then you can also incorporate survivor testimony into that, which I like doing. Safely out. Kind of the same thing where it's like a little bit of an exit ticket moment. So we're reframing the end of the lesson by focusing on humanity's triumph during dark times. So you can reference rescuers, reunions, survivors returning to their life, which sometimes isn't even a happy reunion, but it's kind of like that end cap. I would say give yourself 5 minutes every single time at the end of every period. So it is kind of this reminder. Sometimes if you have to use a timer, that helps. For me, I use lots of timers. And give the students processing time. Use a journal. Have them do a turn-in talk. Maybe you want to read the responses because you're concerned maybe what they might say, or because you're just curious. You could have them put them to the side where you can read them, or you could have them answer like a prompt and then ball it up and throw it in the trash. However you want to approach that is okay too. But we want students to feel like they have some kind of reflection. So you could have them do like, I feel, I learned, whatever works best for your students. Or you could give them options for a sentence stem, however you approach your students, you know them the best. So when we say responsible teaching, here is what we mean. So we want to avoid simulations and role play. These are pretty unsound, and sometimes they can be trivializing of the topic. And you're like talking all day, no, you can't talk. They can cause emotional distress, and they can lead students that they might understand what it's like. We really want to avoid students feeling like they know what they're going through. So that can sometimes happen with simulations or role play. And then the big thing is the cognitive versus emotional empathy. So we want students to have cognitive empathy, meaning that they understand why people acted as they did in the situation that they were in. I think when we teach the Holocaust, a lot of times students will say, well, why didn't they just do XYZ? Why didn't they just XYZ? Right? So because we have more information than people did at that time. So what can happen though, if students are kind of falling into a trauma response, is they might develop emotional empathy, meaning that they might feel like, oh, I know what that feels like, which can lead to judgmental attitudes. So for example, if you're talking about starvation in the Warsaw Ghetto and you have a student that you know has food insecurity, that can be a situation where you want to make sure you're being very sensitive to your students. So like really being careful with your trauma-informed teaching and really making sure they have that cognitive empathy. So getting them to understand why things happened based on the situation instead of having them have that emotional connection. So that can be a little tricky, but if you do the ideas of like safely in or kind of lead them into it, it can help instead of just kind of dropping them into the Holocaust. So same thing with the precision of language. We kind of talked about that earlier, making sure you're defining or distinguishing between complex terms like concentration camps, killing centers, armed resistance, things like that. And then be very careful with the media that you're using. I would say only use graphic images if completely necessary. I'm going to play a clip for you guys here in a moment, and I think it's going to paint a pretty good picture for you. And I'm not going to use any graphic images, and it's going to be a testimony from someone. So it's also kind of giving that first person perspective. So there are a lot of ways that you can get students to understand the reality of the situation without using these graphic images. Just because think about if this was your grandmother or your aunt, and this is like the worst moment of their life, and you're using that image of it. So just some food for thought. So considerations, right? All of this is adjustable. So think about what grade level you're talking about. Are you talking about elementary, middle school, high school? Also the maturity of your students. If you have high school students, but they act like fifth graders, maybe you're going to talk about individual stories of families or children and what they were doing. If it's middle school, maybe you're going to focus on empathy, right? Because Lord knows a middle schooler. And the values, right? So kind of focusing that way. Or if it's high school, you can really get into more of the complexity and community-wide narrative. So things can really kind of shift around based on the maturity of your students. And it's kind of the same thing. If you have middle schoolers, but they're very mature, you might kind of be able to touch on some of those complexities. So very depending on the students, right? All of this is adjustable. A big consideration is to please be present when you're talking about this. Sometimes it's hard to talk about, and we know we're going to be out, and maybe you have one day to talk about the Holocaust, and you're like, well, I'll just leave that lesson for the sub. We would love for you to be present, to be the one to facilitate the lesson, just because if kids have questions, they're not going to ask the sub. They might, but they might just go ask their friend, or they're going to ask ChatGPT. We want you to be the person that they're asking the questions to avoid any of that misinformation to continue spreading. Also, students love choice. Everyone loves choice, right? So within boundaries, if you're able to, if you have time, is really what it comes down to. Allow students to choose which themes or survivor story they really like. So if you know you have a class of 23 rambunctious boys and they love World War II, you could really focus on, like veterans and kind of the liberator stories. If you have more nurturing people in your class, then you can kind of focus on like hiding and those upstanders who help them. So you really have a lot of flexibility when it comes to choice, or really tailoring that lesson for your students. So this is the part where I would love to do a little group activity if you're okay with it. I know you guys have had a long day, but I promise it won't take a long time. So this is a wide lens approach. And if we think back to COVID, we're going to do what's called a waterfall. So what that means is I'm going to pose a question to you, and then I would like you to answer it in the chat. Just type it in the chat. And then I'll give you about a minute or so to put it in the chat. And you can do this on paper with your kids. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. We're obviously adjusting for the digital format right now. But we're going to take this wide lens approach, so this word catastrophe, and we're going to bring it down. Okay. So starting off with the word catastrophe, it says, what does this word mean? So not yet. What I would like you to do is type what you think this word means in the chat. But I do not want you to hit enter. Don't hit enter. Just type it in the chat. Let me go back, sorry. Okay, there we go. So the word catastrophe, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to a minute. And you can obviously adjust this for your students. What does this word mean? And there's a million ways you can approach this, right? It's dictionary definition, what you think, and the words of the Holocaust, however you'd like to approach it. Okay, I'm going to count down from 5. And then when I say go, I would like you to hit enter. It's giving COVID, I know. I would like you to hit enter. And then all the definitions will kind of waterfall onto the chat. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, thank you guys. I was so afraid. Yeah, Yeah, so large scale destruction, disaster on large scale, lots of long-term consequences, something terrible has happened. Yeah, so these are great. So now we're going to kind of bring in our lens, right? So now, who is likely to study catastrophes and why? So same thing, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, but don't hit enter until I say go. And this is like a quick little bell work with your kids, so overthink it. So who is likely to study catastrophes and why? And when we're doing this in a classroom, I might have like them work with their shoulder partners where they can talk to each other and kind of put their definitions together and kind of put those pieces together to kind of come up with that second answer. But we're in a chat, so things are adjusted. All right, I'm going to count down from 5, and then when I say go, drop it in the chat. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Ooh, these are good. Many types of people who want to avoid having the same situation again. We love that. Sociologists, psychologists, historians, those who survived, anthropologists, policymakers, community leaders, first responders. So lots of different types of people would study catastrophe. Okay, so here's my final question to you. And this is how I'm going to take it from wide to really bringing it in. So I have a quote here from Anton Mason. He's a Holocaust survivor. And he says, "We are free, but how will we live our lives without our families?" So how could this relate to the word catastrophe? So same thing. I'm going to give you a few moments, and then we'll waterfall it in the chat. So just hold on to your response. So he says, "We are free, but how will we live our lives without our families?" How does this relate, or could this relate to the word catastrophe? All right, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, waterfall it. Ooh, this is a great one. Losing your family can feel like a disaster and it can be difficult to survive. Yes. We will remember. How do people move on after the trauma? I like that. This is a personal catastrophe whose impact has emotional and mentally affected the person. Yeah. So this is a way that we can, I love that, like bringing it in. So this is a way that we can take a big picture idea and then bring it in, and then relate it to the Holocaust. And then I think we've done the same thing with a different word. So you can use different words to do this as well. So the same thing we can do for our safely out. I have another quote. We're not going to do this one. I'm just going to talk to you guys about it. So I have another Anton Mason quote. Maybe I wanted to sandwich him in my lesson where he says, "We felt that as long as one is alive, they lost." Right? So then the question I posed was a reflection question. So it says, do you agree or disagree with the statement? And kids might surprise you. Maybe they disagree because they're like, no, everyone's gone. That's not fair. Right? So do they agree or disagree with Anton Mason's quote? Because, and then they could explain, right? So there are even different ways that you could approach that. With a different quote or with a different question. I think when kids are processing, sometimes a sentence stem is helpful because it takes a little bit of the pressure off for them. Okay, so I would like to share with you guys 2 oral histories, and they're very different. And the reason why I want to share these with you is because oral histories are a great way to incorporate that kind of person, not statistics, into your classroom. But also, I feel like kids sometimes don't want to listen to their teacher. I don't know about you. So it's like listening to someone else, but it's actually someone who's been there and someone that they've been through something. So I have Margaret Lambert first, and she's going to talk about her life before the Holocaust. And I think she's very relatable because she talks about what things were like for her and how different she kind of felt like she was and the things that she liked to do, compared to Leon Bass, who kind of is talking about his liberator perspective. So these are two different oral histories that you could use in two different time periods. I really like Leon Bass's oral history because I think it really ties in with the civil rights standard. Because oftentimes when we're talking about World War II, we're talking about the Double V campaign. So it really ties in really, really well there. So I'm going to try to play these and hopefully the sound will work. And then we'll see. I'm going to push play and then let me know. Actually, hold on. Last time I did this, I had to do something different. Okay, I'm gonna start the video and then let me know. Okay, here we go. Here we go. All right. I have to mute myself.
On the sharing, you put the
Okay, here we go.
I had a wonderful time.
Can you hear her? Did that work?
yeah, work.
Yeah. It worked. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I had my mother and father, and I had an older brother, about 2 years older than I. And once we got over the sibling rivalry, we got to be very good friends, my brother and I. And my parents found out pretty soon that what Margaret wanted, Margaret got. And they let me be my own because I was not the usual child. But I had my own way of dressing. I didn't like what my mother got for me. I wouldn't wear it. And I was strong-willed. And I knew what I wanted to do very early on in life. I wanted to be a coach, physical education teacher. My parents thought I was a little freaky with all this business about sports that I was so very into. I skated, I skied, I swam, I ran, I climbed. Through my sport activities, there were more non-Jewish people involved than Jewish people. I was the only girl in my class. I was the only Jew in my class, and it never made any difference. I mean, I never felt any anti-Semitism until a certain time. I always knew I was Jewish, but our house, there was no religion practiced, really. I always say, my father said, be a decent human being, that should be your religion, and I think I have practiced that, pretty much.
Okay, so there's Margaret. And then I'm gonna switch my tab, my sharing tab. Excuse me. For Leon Bass. So his oral history is a little bit longer. I'm not going to play his whole oral history, but I will certainly, you guys have access to the links. So you're good to, if you want to enjoy his history. It's great.
Finally, we came to a place where we stopped. And we were not far from Weimar. That was where we were heading. And that's where the colonel said to Lieutenant Brummel, he said, round up some of the men in the intelligence reconnaissance section, maybe 3 or 4. I want you to go over to Weimar, see what the town looks like, and see what else is over there. I think it's what we've been hearing about a concentration camp. So he came out, Brummel came out and came over to me and 2 others, and he said, come with me. So we followed him and got aboard a truck. But I leaned over and I said, sir, where are we going? He said, we're going to a concentration camp. And I said to myself, what? A concentration camp? I didn't know anything about concentration camps. In all the training they had given me, no one ever mentioned concentration camps. But on this day in April in 1945, I was to have the shock of my life. I was going to walk through the gates of a concentration camp called Buchenwald. And I wasn't ready for that. Totally unprepared for that kind of an experience. But I can never, ever forget the day. That spring day in April when I walked through the gates and I saw in front of me what I now call the walking dead. I saw human beings human beings that had been beaten and starved and tortured and denied everything. They were standing in front of me, skin and bone. They had skeletal faces with deep-set eyes, and they were standing there. Some of them were holding on to each other to keep from falling. Others were on the ground and were dying. And I looked at that. I said, my God, who are these people? What have they done that was so terrible that could cause anyone to treat them like this? I didn't know, honestly. But I saw a young man. He was not in any bad shape. He was much younger than the others, and he spoke English quite well. So I talked to him. I said, who are these people? And he started telling me. He said that they're Jews and gypsies and Jehovah's Witnesses. Some are Catholics. They're oh God, so many of them, different groups. Some of them were unionists, belonged to the union. Some are communists, homosexuals. He went on with a litany of groups that had been placed in the camp. I said, for what? Why? He said, the Nazis said they weren't good enough. They weren't fit to live. They could be terminated, murdered. Now something registered with me. I had been told I wasn't good enough. Nobody ever said those words to me, but that's what they told me when I said, you can't drink here. And these people were told they weren't good enough, and therefore
You're muted.
You're muted.
So I would, am I good now?
Yes. Yeah, you're good.
Thank you. The struggles. So I would probably use Margaret for more of like middle school because she's talking about sports. Those are all things that they can relate to. And then I would probably save Leon for more of the high school kids because he obviously is talking a little bit more graphic and in detail, but he is also kind of referencing that double V there, the civil rights struggle. Because obviously he's an African-American man. In a segregated military. So those are pieces that you can touch on that are nice little supports and that kind of hit on multiple things. So oral histories, I think, are excellent resources to use. Speaking of resources, I have like a little list of recommended resources that I would suggest. So the USC Shoah Foundation is absolutely wonderful. They also have what's called Dimensions in Testimony that it's kind of like early AI, I want to say, where they interviewed dozens of Holocaust survivors and then kind of put them on like a green screen and then recorded their responses. So students can actually ask questions and then it will use kind of like an algorithm to match a question that they were asked by the Shoah Foundation and what the students have asked. So it's not making up an answer, it's just playing a pre-recorded answer. But out of the thousands of questions that they were asked, it's kind of like finding those pieces. So it feels like the students are having a conversation, which I think is amazing. There's obviously Yad Vashem, which is like the worldwide Holocaust Memorial Museum. So they have tons of resources, echoes and reflections. The National World War II Museum, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has tons of resources. History Unfolded, I also really, really like because it is actual newspapers. So you can allow students to kind of go on a little bit of a scavenger hunt, so to speak, and see, well, what did they know about the Holocaust, or what did they know about concentration camps in Wyoming? What do they know about them in Florida? How was it being reported on in one state versus another? So you can really see, well, when Leon says we had no idea what we were walking into, why did that happen? So you can see like actual newspapers that have been kind of preserved and digitized, and then students can see, oh, there wasn't actually a whole lot of reporting happening, and they can get those pieces. And then, of course, we are a resource that you can use, of course, the Holocaust Center of Florida. So I do want to end before I turn it back over to Stephen with some upcoming events that we have if you are able to be in the Central Florida area. This is also, we'd love to meet you face to face. So if you're able to come out to any of these events, that would be great. But we have a new exhibit that has opened, the Mezuzah Traces, and we have a Meet the Curator going on from September 17th, from 6:30 to 7:30. So it's a quick little hour. And the curators and founders of Mezuzah Traces, the project, they will come and share kind of the history of the work that they do. And if you don't know about what they do, they kind of go through Poland and find hidden mezuzahs that were hidden throughout the Holocaust, because those are essentially prayer scrolls on doorways, and people put them outside their homes. And obviously during the Holocaust, you could not have those. So they would put them inside the door frames. So they kind of are like archaeologists in a way, and they're searching and finding these and extracting them. So, and kind of making copies. It's very powerful. So we have the curators coming by. We obviously then have Holocaust Education Week approaching the second week of November. So this is the designated week from the Florida Department of Education, the second week in November. We have the 9th to the 13th. I believe everyone's on our contact list. You guys will be getting like kind of the information we have going on. Right now, a big thing that we have are going to be a couple of live streams going on and a little student institute kind of preview thing. So if you're in the Central Florida area, definitely something to check out. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen. Stephen, do you think I should show them like a preview of the lesson plan?
I was getting ready to suggest a preview of the lesson plan would be fantastic.
Okay, so because you guys are completing this series, we have some, I have to switch my tab. We have some lesson plans that we have made for you guys that if you want to use, you can. And our goal is by the end of this series, you have this kind of like bank of lesson plans that you can use. And so with the first one, it's kind of the overview of the Holocaust using the Echoes and Reflection timeline. So it's really straightforward. There's a bell ringer that is similar to the catastrophe one that we did, but it's using the word dehumanization. So you can kind of adjust that if you'd like. There is a video called Daniel's Story, which goes through the timeline of the Holocaust from the eyes of children. So it follows this boy named Daniel, and he is a fictional character, but he is a collage of many different children and their experiences throughout the Holocaust. There are a few reflection questions there that kind of come back to dehumanization. There's a presentation, and then the students are able to use the Echoes and Reflections timeline. You can give them different years, whichever, you can split it up however you'd like. And they can really do a deep dive and see what was happening in the assigned year that you gave them. And then you can have students kind of put the pieces together of a timeline. I really like a timeline at the beginning of a Holocaust unit because I think it kind of gives a lot of context as to everything that was going on. And then as you dive in, it's a little bit easier. But obviously you don't have to do any of these in order. It comes with the student worksheet. Oh my God, stop thinking. Student worksheet, and also you can easily make this digital if you guys are one-to-one or anything like that. So I think it's a pretty cool thing. There is also, this is a folder that you guys will have access to all the time. There is a PowerPoint that goes along with the lesson plan, and it has everything linked in it. So it has the standards, it has the video, it has all of those pieces there. A little bit of an overview about the Holocaust, not quite as in detail because they're going to do the timeline project. And then I believe there's also some information about trauma-informed teaching for Holocaust education, which I think this is in the modules. I want to say
Yeah, it's in the modules as well. Jasmine,
perfect.
We've got this for Holocaust education, but would you think this would work just as well for other types of traumatic history being taught?
Yes. Yeah, so I would say the principles, especially safely in, safely out, is going to work for any type of traumatic history that you're teaching, or even difficult history. Depending on the students in your class, sometimes even African American history can be hard. So trying to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Can be hard. So this can be something that you can always modify. But just the idea of bringing students into a lesson and then exiting them out is always a good idea, especially when it's challenging, because we don't want to expose them to Holocaust material and then be like, okay, go on over to sixth period, bye. Or really anything like when we talk about the Rosewood Massacre, for example, that's a good one where we could use kind of a safely in, safely out to really kind of tie those pieces together. So yeah, 100% not just Holocaust education.
Wonderful.
I am
Well,
curious, since I have you guys as a captive audience, what is your struggle when you're teaching Holocaust education? What do you tend to struggle with? You can mute, unmute, you can put it in the chat, whatever works for you, works for me.
I know when I taught it, I always struggled with avoiding sensationalism because you want the kids to really understand what happened, and so you go to the big stories and the dark stories, and you really need to avoid that. Sometimes I struggled with that, particularly during my first year, but I got a little better at that over time. I found the Echoes and Reflections curriculum, which was popular at the time I taught, to be pretty effective at helping with that.
It's hard too because it's flashy and it gets their attention. So it is like a little bit of a trap. But yeah, I agree.
I think a lot of us are really good at maybe teaching the big numbers of millions of killed and the scale of it, but that in a sense almost dehumanizes the victims almost in a perverse way, like the Nazis intended, because we don't always make time to look at the human story.
And an easy way to address that is one oral history. I know, and someone just said the limited time, and I agree, like time is, we always wish we had more time. Um, but even sharing one oral history, helps them realize, oh, this was a person, or we can, have a Holocaust survivor come to your school or Zoom or whichever. But when they put a face to the names, it does help.
I
Yeah.
think
But
that
that's
is really important, making sure that they get the human experience. And I loved how you went through the whole life, that they're not just defined by the most horrible thing that happened in their entire life, that there was rich contribution history prior to that. There are some wonderful stories after that of resilience and survival and flourishing. And we need to recognize and honor that, that we don't want to be defined by the worst circumstances of our life. And that's hard to do when, as Lindsay said, you have a week to do the World War II, that gives you one day to do the Holocaust or whatever that may be. So um, we appreciate all the resources you've given and shared that can help us kind of balance that out.
all right. I'll hand it back over to Stephen.
yay. Well, I really want to, so just so you know, originally, this was session 2. In case you've ever like put something in an LMS and had to flip it, it's not fun to try to do that and have everything like kind of like misplace and fall apart and break and not work. And but Jasmine wasn't going to be available for session 2 on the time when I have it, because if you we've kind of labeled what we did. We sat down and mapped out all the sessions are to be on the third Thursday of every month, same time, 6:30. If you're not able to make the sessions will be well, I'm going to say immediately, not literally immediately. Once the session's over, I'll record it and I'll put it in the modules, so you'll be able to see the entire session afterwards, and we'll leave it up for a month. The way I'd love for everyone who is going to continue to come back for some of the other sessions, please provide feedback. as to, because I've allotted 25 days once you start a session to complete it. I timed myself, and I was able, aside from the hour that we're spending here, it's about like 20 minutes worth of work. I don't think that's too, much. Um, but if you have any questions, we definitely want to hear, and also feedback as to what worked, what didn't, and then if you really feel you'd like to contribute by, leading one of the sessions, I wanted to kind of quickly go over, our next session is going to be the foundation session. So these kind of map together, but we're actually going to look at we're going to look at the standards, but really we're going to do a walkthrough of some of those resources, some of the ones that I know are approved by the state. And it's going to be a little less of a presentation and more of an actual, I'm going to open up some of the resources themselves, and go through some of them, especially some of the ones that were always that are my favorites. Also, some new ones. I know the USHMM is working on, as well as Yad Vashem, that are really good. They're approved. They're very tied to individual stories and narratives. Jasmine mentioned if you haven't used Dimensions in Testimony, I mean, it really is, engaging. Of course, the big disconnect is, as we had a meeting yesterday with a number of Holocaust scholars with our museum design team for any museum, and a lot of the people who work at USHMM and Yad Vashem, their biggest comments were saying what they were seeing in the museum space was just it's the same thing I think you're all seeing in classrooms: no attention span. I mean, an immediate disconnect, which is why I think a lot of people move to sensationalism. During our Teachers Institute, we did a virtual walkthrough of Auschwitz. So for $200, if you'd like, you're able to take your students. They actually have a person who will lead you through Auschwitz, and Josh knows this, is they'll actually walk you through live through the camp. Well, they have overlay images that are shown throughout the entire walkthrough, and it is live, it is in person, but they're leading you through. Some of the overlay images are extremely graphic, and one of the testimonies, I think most of us would get in trouble for having it played in our classroom, because one of the testimonies is very, very graphic. So, after that, we had Jasmine do this session, and then we had Alan Hall, who's a gentleman who lives in Miami. And I'd also like to extend a thanks out to, we're going to be extending a lot of this down to the Holocaust Memorial, Miami Beach, and they're going to push it out to their counties down there as well. But they had Alan come on. Prior to this survivor speaking, 4 of the teachers had asked, where can I get the material? There's some really good, shocking stuff that I can show these kids that'll really get them to, I mean, and that was the whole point. The point of showing the walkthrough was because I wanted to see who would say that. We wanted to see, who would think this is the way we need to approach it. It's the only way. After I think, and Jasmine, or actually, I think Mark was there. Dr. Wenton was there. Nancy was there. I think after they heard the testimony, I think some people changed their minds and thought there were more impactful ways to engage. And I think there are some really powerful testimonies. Again, it's what's quickest. I'm out of time. I have one day. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about is, again, intentionality, and everyone's favorite term, deliberate practice, for, Holocaust education. I think I stand by it. I think it's very important, but we're going to try to have some more resources that you can use. If at any point in time you want some lessons that are different, that are a little, if you need something more rigorous, all of these lessons we try to make, of course, safe and something you can use that are all tied to the standards. One thing that we're working on is putting together the different packages, and we're going to have a lesson for each one of these sessions. So the next session again is our Holocaust standards. The session following that is going to be the Nuremberg laws and Jim Crow. Appropriate ways to teach that. Actually, I'm a big fan of using Leon Bass's testimony for that. I think it's actually very powerful and works very well. And this is, from democracy to dictatorship. This is looking at the fall of the Weimar Republic and teaching the gradual loss of rights. I am not getting political. This is literally following the standards. The Nuremberg trials, justice, human rights, and civic responsibility. This is looking at the impact of the Nuremberg trials after and its impact in the world today. And then following into the next year, we go into teaching first-person narratives, which is using survivor testimonies appropriately, especially as we lose survivors. I mean, those of you who live in areas where you might have access to survivors more than others, I think we have one survivor in the Orlando area who can actually speak, and she was 4. We have a couple who really left beforehand, but it's getting harder and harder. Some of the South Florida areas have a little more access to some survivors, but some of them are still finding it hard to leave their homes. They can't run a Zoom. There's a lot of difficulty for them. So, how do we continue that and without trivializing it? And then can we use second gen, third gen survivors, for sharing these stories? One of the final sessions is memorialization and remembrance, and having to make how do we have big commemorative activities? Holocaust Education Week comes up. Are there ways to get schools involved into doing whole school activities that don't trivialize the Holocaust, we get everyone involved, but maybe aren't the standard lesson? Without doing it again, without trivializing. That kind of will wrap things up. And if you have any other ideas or want to throw things out there, I figure once a month is plenty to be talking about. This is a big topic. I will leave discussion boards open, so if you want to throw out, you can create your own topics. I put a few things in the discussion board, but the discussion boards are set up so you can put in your own topics. If you'd like to put up a place to share resources that you think are effective and useful, you're able to do so without any problem. If you have any kind of technical glitches, feel free to let me know. I will probably add many of you to the next sessions just so it's easy, so you're automatically enrolled and put into the Zoom. And again, if you miss anything live, the recorded sessions will be put up immediately. I think the last thing is I had someone who asked me in South Carolina. We were making a series of of lessons that were all going to be like kind of DBQ based, that were going to be a little more rigorous, that were looking at the Nuremberg laws. I might send some out, and I'd love to get feedback as well. What do you think? Do you think they apply here? Because some of the lessons people are concerned about, can I teach this? Well, that's why I think everyone's on here to learn, but also to provide feedback, because many of you are are running social studies, and we know, at least what I'm hearing in Central Florida, I know some social studies departments are losing folks, and it's becoming more and more challenging. So we try to back each other up, and many of you have, and uh, you know um, I don't plan on stopping doing what I'm doing soon, and I don't think FCS has to stop with what they're doing soon. And I hope on the next call we'll have some folks from the Holocaust Memorial at Miami Beach, and we'll just continue to to grow and to back each other up. Thank you so much for joining us today. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up, or any comments? Gotcha. It's a lively 725 group, or unless you're 625, Sherry. I mean, some of y'all are in the panhandle, but I do gotta say, I tell you, this was Jasmine put this lesson together. I guarantee you have not seen a lesson like she did for Safely and Safely Out. She did this on her own, did a really nice job basing it off of some of the elements with echoes and reflections, and then also USHMM. But it was a really nice activity. I think it was really, and made me think. And actually, when we had our teachers in, I mean, it had a lot of great response for a different way to really engage people. So I really want to applaud her for stepping up and taking this and running with this. So thank you, Jasmine, for just a great job. And uh, other than that, thank you all for joining. I'll let you guys go and maybe have dinner or whatever you're going to do. I'm going to fall asleep. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to myself. I'm sure Josh or Sherry, or I mean anybody here from FCSS, and we'd be happy to help you out in any way that we can, providing the right resources for your district. And if you have some to share, send them our way. We'd love to be able to load some more in some of the folders for sharing for other teachers that join remotely or after the fact, because we actually had 25 join, and some have already completed the work, so just not everyone's able to join live tonight. Okay. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good
Thanks,
evening.
Take,
everybody. Thanks, Jasmine.
take care.